I create a brand which is called MB&F. F means Maximilian Büsser and Friends. We've now come out with 21 calibres in 19 years. Every calibre would need to bring in 8 to 12 million Swiss francs of revenue in its life. If everybody you love can't afford them, what's the point of what you're doing? We come out with the M.A.D editions at 2,900. The watch I wear the most is Legacy Machine Perpetual Evo, which I'm wearing today. Just because the story of the two calibers that Stephen McDonnell created, the hardship he's gone through in his life, the genius he has to create those two movements is mind-boggling. A gentleman called Beat Haldimann. He creates virtually everything himself, still on hand-driven machines. He has no CNC, and he creates some of the most beautiful classic watches ever. Hello, Andy.
Hello, Max. How are you?
I'm well. How are you? Can you hear me well?
I can, loud and clear. Do you longboard? I noticed the longboard in the back.
Yeah, it's more for decoration because I love it than I'm at an age where I take less risks. My wife and my kids do.
That's awesome. And I like your book with those car designs. Are those real car designs? Like, do
Yeah,
those cars exist?
that is what's it called? It's all these aerodynamic streamlined designs of the 30s, which
Beautiful.
are incredible. It's yeah, what you call streamline automobile design, which is something we've always said. There's a lot of weird stuff around me. You've got two-legged Christmas baubles. You've got a frog skeleton. You have all sorts of weird stuff happening around me.
It reminds me of your office. I remember I was watching some YouTube videos and you had some interviews taking people to office. Like you have like, it's so beautiful. It's this old sort of building, but then you have all these cool, unique sort of sculptures and artifacts lying around. It's like a museum.
It's yeah, it's basically I've tried to bring together our little world because our world is very pretty special. And people don't get it, which I completely understand. But when you visit here, they what we call the Madhouse, because there's got this whole Mad Gallery, Madhouse, Mad Edition, etc. Mad meaning mechanical art devices. We, if you come and visit, you start understanding where we come from. And I find I've done a few brand visits, and most of the time I'm pretty much disappointed because they just show you, oh, this is what we make, and there's no why. There's a little bit of how, but it's staged. And yeah, there's a moment where you feel, well, you know what? I would have preferred not visiting this place because now I don't actually consider this brand as high as I did before.
Max, tell me a bit about where did your design background come from? You have an amazing eye for beautiful designs, beautiful products. Where did that come from?
It's interesting because I'm a pretty awful designer, but I did want to be a car designer when I was a kid. So from the age of 4 to the age of 18, I was sketching cars all the time. I would spend all my classes actually drawing cars. And when I was 18, my parents unfortunately couldn't afford to send me to the Pasadena Art Center, which is the car design university. And so I went into engineering, and but it's always been part of who I am. I didn't have the talent to actually make beautiful designs by my hand, but how I put this, I was a weird kid which had very weird ideas, and therefore I suffered a lot because weird kids have a tough childhood. And when I became a grown up, I realized being different, being weird, having eccentric ideas at some point was what I was going to actually revendiquer, you say in French. I was going to say that is who I am because there was maybe 10 years in my life from the age of 18 to, I'm going to say 28, 30, where I tried to blend in, to fit in. And because there is a moment where you do feel very lonely if you don't. And at some point in my early 30s, going, you know what? No, no, I'm going to go back to who I was. And I think I will be proud of myself if I stick to that.
Max, what were you doing prior to MB&F? Like, where were you able to stress your sort of weirdness?
So after engineering, I was incredibly lucky to fall into watchmaking. Now, when I signed in 1991 with Jaeger-LeCoultre, which was then a tiny little brand, which was a third of the size of my tiny brand today, everybody around me, my parents included, looked at me and like, what, why? What's wrong with you? Why are you going to work in a watch brand? Watchmaking, Swiss watchmaking was dead. And Jaeger-LeCoultre was on its umpteenth verge of bankruptcy. And I just fell in love with an industry which was not an industry, it was artisanship in those days, where a couple of hundreds, a couple of thousand insane human beings thought it was okay to handcraft a mechanical movement which was 100 times more expensive than quartz and probably 10 times less reliable and 10 times um, more well, it was just something which made no sense whatsoever, but it was about beauty and it was about humanity. And I was brought up in the 80s. I mean, I was in the 60s, but I mean, we really in the 80s it impacted me. And it was very much Gordon Gekko, greed is good. And it was also, it was about being pragmatic and being efficient. And here I fell into a world where that was absolutely not the point. And I fell in love with that world. So my first job was at Jaeger-LeCoultre in 1991. Was blessed to spend 7 extraordinary years there from 91 to 98. And then in 98, I was amazingly headhunted to become the head of Harry Winston Timepieces. In those days, Harry Winston was still a family-owned business, was the sons of Harry who owned it. And they had a small watch division in Geneva, which they gave me the responsibility of. And it was it was also in a pretty dire situation, that company. I was a specialist of entering companies where they're in a really bad situation, which is a great thing, by the way, because I don't think I would have ever been able to create my own brand if I hadn't gone through those two very difficult beginnings. If I'd started working in big, successful brands, I wouldn't have had the keys and the knowledge and the courage to create my own brand. And so there I was. I took over Harry Winston Timepieces, which was also virtually bankrupt. And 7 years later, I accessed my dream. Now, let's be clear, that was a pretty recent dream. I there was nobody in my environment who was an entrepreneur, and I never expected or even dreamt of creating my own brand. It was not in the cards I was dealt as a youngster. It happened in the middle of Harry Winston when I started getting very friendly with a certain amount of independent watchmakers, F.P. Journe for François-Paul Journe and Felix Baumgartner and Martin Pfeiffer-Urwerk and Vianney Halter, all dreamers, all creators who created what they believed in and knew it was going to be an absolutely insanely difficult uphill battle not to go bankrupt. It was not about being a successful entrepreneur. It's not about building a business. It's about expressing yourself. And I met these people and I was blown away. Suddenly I realized my life, which was on this wagon, which was, yes, you are successful because you are making a lot of money for the company you're working for, seemed so shallow and so pathetic that I decided I want to be these guys. So I have to thank them a lot.
It's so amazing how just looking at the watches that you make, Max, they're so beautiful, they're so interesting, they're so unique. And I don't know if I'm just ignorant to it, but it doesn't feel like there's people making interesting pens, people making interesting wallets or glasses that are really unique, but watches somehow have this sort of small pocket of people like yourself and those names you mentioned where you can really express yourself. And I'm like surprised it's not in other sort of pockets, other different products.
Maybe because what we do is pointless. Now, if you start crafting a product which is actually useful, you have so many boundaries that it's complicated to go insane. A mechanical watch, we all know we don't need it. We all have our phones now. You've got your Apple watches for those who have them. Um, we definitely don't need something strapped on our wrist even. And because we don't need it, we should, we need to be much more crazy, much more eccentric, because the only reason you should buy a beautiful mechanical watch is because it's a pure work of art. It's a work of artisanship. It's something which generates emotion. I'm going to say, and again, I'm going to make myself a lot of friends. Unfortunately, too many people buy high-end watches as status or status, depending which continent you're on, just to show off that they've got money. And they don't actually understand what they're buying. And that is a vast majority of owners today, and not of MB&F, luckily, but of the watch industry. So, but the only reason you should buy a piece of watchmaking art is because it's art.
Yeah, you just sort of made me realize the shift. Like I own a Rolex, but you know, spending $20,000 on this Rolex, like it's nice, it's cool, but like with $20,000, I definitely would want one of your crazy unique pieces, which I don't think would probably I wouldn't like the $20,000 probably wouldn't be able to do that. But you're right. Like I bought this piece because it's you know it's a great store of value. It's I'm not going to lose money on it. I can wear it. It's great to have when you're sort of going into meetings or when you're filming videos. People see it. People notice it. But it's like for $20,000, I'd love something that is just crazy, like the products you create. So you're very right there.
You have to have your journey as a watch collector. And Rolex is the very first step for most. And don't get me wrong, it's probably the greatest brand ever. As an industrial product, it's an extraordinary piece of engineering. It's a company with insanely strong ethics. I mean, if there is one brand I admire in this industry, it is Rolex. But it's not artisanship, and it doesn't try to say it's artisanship. And it's not crazy because that's not what it is. It's an incredible tool watch, which is incredibly well engineered and which will last for decades, and that you can give your kids, and your kids will be able to give their kids, and it will never be out of fashion because it's not a fashionable object. So don't get me wrong, you've done a great choice, but there's a journey. There's a journey like in everything when you start collecting anything. And could it, I don't know, if you start off, let's even, well, everybody wears sneakers, me included, for the last 20 years. But I mean, if you're into shoes, there is this whole journey also where you end up at some point with that master cobbler who will make your shoes specifically for you. But you can't go from sneakers to that. You need there's a journey, and we welcome everybody on that journey.
As you sort of just shared that, I think I wouldn't be surprised, and I'd like to get to a point where in the next 10, 20 years, I'm sort of either just rocking a cheap Casio G-Shock watch or an artisan piece, and I can sort of exclude myself from the in-between. And I think the in-between is where a lot of people get stuck, and I guess I'm stuck there right now, and I guess I wasn't aware, I didn't have the knowledge. But you're right, you either just get something that does the job, like a Casio, very strong G-Shock, resistance, waterproof, or if you're gonna put money into a watch, you might as well get something that is like a piece of art.
Again, everybody's different. Who are we to judge? Who are we to say you should do that or you must do that? I think that's completely wrong. Everybody follows their own sensitivity. I remember the first time I met somebody wearing a Rolex. I was 18 years old. I was at university, and my parents had decided for my 18th birthday to give me a watch. Now, this is a very, very long time ago. This is the early 80s, and I was not into watches. I didn't give a damn about watches. And I started looking around. I had a budget of 700 francs, which would be about, 1,000 Sing dollars. And at some point, I'm sitting next to a guy on in university, and I say, "What are you wearing?" And he says, "It's a Rolex." And I have no idea what it is. And he starts telling me about it. And at some point, he tells me it's mechanical. I'm like, "What? Why would you ever buy a mechanical watch?" Anyway, okay. So what's the price? And he tells me in those days, 4,700 Swiss francs. So now remember, my budget was 700. And I give absolute hell to that guy. Right? What the F is wrong with you? I used to be a cinema usher in the evenings and give maths tuition during lunch breaks and sell hi-fi on weekends. And I probably would make that in a year. And this guy was wearing a year of my salary on his wrist. And of course, I gave him hell. Now, fast forward 40 years later, yes, well, luckily in the meantime, I bumped into him again and apologized about 25 years ago. But it's normal that everybody's got their own ecosystem. They've got their own filter through which they see the world. And who are we to say you should look at it that way or this way? I think you just go where your heart brings you.
Growing up the way you did, where you said you didn't have much opportunities, sort of where you're at wasn't in the cards, where did you get your sort of taste for design, for, I guess, like, yeah, just design in general, like art, like, where did that come from, given your upbringing?
So I was a very lonely, only child. And what saved me from going bananas, and I probably did go a little bit into depression at some point, was to create. So I was drawing all the time. I was imagining incredible stories. I, I had probably two choices in my life. It was either to become a superhero or to become a creator. I didn't have the talent to be a superhero, unfortunately. So I was all the time creating stuff. And that is something I have to work with now with my children. This new generation, as soon as they don't have something to do, and if it's not involving screens, they're like, "I'm bored." Being bored is the supremely most important thing to become a creator. You cannot be all the time engaged looking at stuff, being fed stuff, and create. You create when your brain is suddenly is nothing else to do, and then you start creating. And so I was incredibly lucky. Now, God knows that I didn't believe I was lucky in those days to spend years of the moment which is very formative is your childhood and your I'm going to say your teens, having unfortunately very few friends and all the time imagining stuff to not go insane. Now, 40 years later, I create a brand, or actually, no, 25 years later, I create a brand which is called MB&F. F means Maximilian Büsser and Friends. And so, yes, I have to, as a creator, I have to find the time not to be continuously submerged. And that's very difficult, especially in the era of social media, because we're look, at the end of the day, human beings are dopamine addicts, one way or the other. And now we're being fed this insane dopamine thanks to social media. And as soon as a few years ago, I went to see a neurologist, you say, yeah, specialist in because I felt that I was really losing my memory. And after 6 hours of tests over 2 days, he told me I was actually above average. I'm like, "What are you talking about? I can't remember people's names. I can't remember this." He said, "You probably were a guy who had an incredibly, very, very impressive memory when you were in your 30s. So now that you're 50s, you feel like forgetting stuff is unacceptable." Well, people with normal memories, they just take it for norm that you're going to forget stuff. But let's come back to your life and let's give you a few keys. And well, I remember because he interviews you like for an hour and a half in that process. And one of the question was, "What do you do when you arrive at a traffic light?" And what do? I jump on my phone. I've got 10 or 20 seconds free. I would jump on my phone, check if there's a message, an email, a WhatsApp, a Instagram message, whatever, you name it. And he looked at me and he said, Do you actually think that the human brain has been has developed in a way that it's on 18 hours a day? So, smartphones arrived like 13 years ago. Before that, I mean, remember, I mean, internet arrived like 25 years ago, 30 years ago. Before that, we were sending letters. I remember I was in a era where we sent letters out and we would wait for that letter to come back. A couple of weeks later, we would send faxes and things like that. So the amount of information we got was a fraction of what we're getting today. And we had all this downtime, and that was normal. And I think this is the biggest danger of this new generation is that we're being fed non-stop information. Our brains are getting saturated non-stop, and there is no way we can create. That is one of the biggest dangers today. There are many others, but that's one of them.
I was watching this YouTube video. I think you were giving a tour of, the sort of the madhouse, and I was watching the watchmakers put together a watch from scratch, and it requires so much focus. Like it would be impossible for someone, a millennial, a Gen Zer, to have that focus to make a watch. I guess that leads into my next question of like, are we running out of watchmakers?
No, we're not, luckily. And actually, we have half of our watchmakers we've got two in the 20s, couple in their 30s, and we've also got 50 plus year olds, and some have been with me for the last 15 years. So they started maybe when they were in their late 30s and now in their 50s. But luckily, that's not changing. We're having another danger happening is that a certain amount of watchmaker students who finish watchmaking school decide not to become watchmakers. Why is that? Because being a watchmaker is a calling for sure. I mean, you're going to be in front of your components for the better part, in our case, from 2 to 4 weeks. It goes to a month sometimes, assembling painstakingly 600 components, making sure that everything is right, being a detective, finding why it's not exactly working the way it should be, going back, deconstructing it, finding what could have gone wrong, reconstructing it. It's a work of love. It's a labor of love. But all that makes sense if at the end of the 2, 3, 4 weeks, when you start winding that crown at a specific moment, the heart starts beating, the balance wheel starts turning. Ta-da, ta-da. It's exactly like a heart beating. Now, most of the big brands will not let watchmakers assemble the movement from scratch anymore. And that is a very big danger of our industry. And because it's taking the whole purpose of that labor of love off. If a watchmaker, he or she is assembling 25 or 30 components and then giving it to the next one as assembling 30 components. And I understand that when you do 5 to 10,000 watches a month, you can't depend on the individual focus and quality of every person. You have to make sure that the quality is really top there, and it can't depend on human beings. But that is not why most great watchmakers signed on. And that's something for us, typically, like every watchmaker assembles his or her movement from scratch, however long time it takes. There is no timing behind it. That's also another issue. Some watchmakers go twice as fast as others, and that is okay in both ways. We don't care if you're very slow or if you're very fast. You do something which is the best. And that is in a world where ISO 9000, 7001, 9001, I can't remember what it is, norms, where we have to make sure that everything is perfect. It basically dehumanizes the world. And we have to accept that something which is made by hand by a human being may have an issue, but it's made with love, and that person has given everything they had into it. So yes, we've just hired a young 20-year-old out of watchmaking school, because we also It's the next part is we also have a responsibility of training and helping the new generation become that next generation. Now we're a very small company. We're going to be 10 watchmakers. I can't hire 5 to train them, unfortunately, but we hire one every 2, 3 years to do that. And that makes me proud also.
Max, with each watchmaker, how many watches of the same collection would they make until they then would start making the new collection? And then how do you constantly, because each collection you're only doing a limited amount of pieces, so watchmakers are constantly having to learn how to make the next watch, and you can't have an instruction manual for every single collection, or do you?
So that's a great question. And that's one of the also the points which really defines us. If you work in one of the big brands, you will be working on one specific calibers for X years, and then you graduate to the next one, and then you'll be doing that one for the next 2, 3, 4 years, and then it's hyper repetitive, which also makes for better quality probably. But the purpose, the humanity is not there. So at MB&F, every one of our watchmakers works on every one of our calibers. Now we have at any given time about 8 different calibers in parallel, and some are better than others and they can choose. Some prefer this one and some prefer that one. But if you come to work with us, you will be working on all sorts of different movements. And that makes it so much more interesting. Now, the mantra at MB&F is treat people the way you want to be treated. And in everything we do, internally and externally, we've applied that. And typically, if I was a watchmaker, would I want to do the same movement for 5 years? Gosh, no. Would I want to do just put 25 components, give it to the next person? Of course not. So we have applied what we think we would like. The other thing is also it's something, lots of things I'm saying. It's something where when I entered the watch world in 91, that was the norm. Every watchmaker would assemble their movement from scratch and they would go from one caliber to the other. It was normal because we're very small companies and it was artisanship. And so that's something we want to safeguard. And it's not only us. I mean, luckily, we are a handful of independent small artisan watchmakers doing this. We're still very, very, very small compared to the industry. But we're keeping alive that world, which is a beautiful world.
Max, is it possible for someone to make their own watch from scratch? Or is it impossible and you need huge upfront investment to create a watch that's made up of 80 pieces?
So there is an ecosystem in Switzerland of hundreds of artisans and suppliers who make all the different parts. So if you don't have the capacity to do everything yourself, and there are very, very, very few companies or individuals who can do that. Now, we typically we craft internally about 20 to 25% of all our movement components and about 80% of all our cases. It wasn't always like that. I mean, I started off all alone in my flat, and the friends were typically all the artisans I worked with who I just created the design. And then, so it is possible. It's definitely possible. You can, and it's what's interesting now is thanks to social media, it's that much more easy than when I started out 20 years ago. So today, there is a whole new generation of watchmakers or creators who are actually launching their usually simple, very beautiful, but simple hour, minute, second movement, which is going to be a movement with about 150 to 180 components. And they can come out with it, often subcontracted most of the components, but maybe they finish it themselves. And of course, they assemble it themselves. And then they put it on social media, and boom, you have immediately 25, 50, 100 people saying, how can I buy it? So it's a whole resurgence which is helping a new generation of creators, and I'm extremely happy about that.
Max, when you say you have 8 calibers, Is it like Rolex how they have, I guess, the Datejust, GMT 2 Plus, Skydellas, where each one of their, I guess, collections, it's pretty much the same each year. They might change the dial, they might make some improvements. So do you have a consistent eight sort of set caliber that's the same each year?
Really not. If you look at our lineup,
Yeah.
I'm going to say that there are very few calibers movements which have anything in common. Now, yes, typically if you're on a legacy machine, there will be a flying balance wheel, but they're not always the same balance wheels. And if they're not the same balance wheels, then the whole system of the movement from the barrels and the gears are completely different. So we're ending up with thousands of different components which we engineer because we engineer everything in-house and craft. And so for a little company which crafts, we craft about, I'm going to say between 32 and 36 watches a month. The thousands of components we have to engineer, craft, and manage is economical nonsense. Makes no sense whatsoever. That's why we don't have a CFO. We don't even have a financial controller, because if there was one, they would tell us, do not do what you're doing. It makes no sense. But it does. It makes sense for me. It makes no financial sense, but it makes real sense for me.
Yeah, I was just thinking like when people make sneakers, let's say the Air Force One, and it does really well, they would just mass produce it. They might change different colorways, but overall the base is still the same. But you're constantly producing completely different watches. So you're having to like start from square one with every new watch you make, and all your watchmakers, they have to learn how to make that. You have to make all the parts individually. So it's a constant sort of restarting. How do you sort of design and then teach your watchmakers how to make this new design and yeah, how?
Well, I will say that the knowledge increments. So we've now come out with 21 calibers in 19 years. Are they all completely different? No. There are some components which basically some innovations, developments that were very difficult to implement, and now we know how to do them. So I'll give you a good example is the Bulldog. It's this watch which I created, which was inspired by a dog. It's got four legs, eyes, a brain, jaws. And if you look at that piece, which was actually, I designed it in 2012 and it came out in 2020, that's 8 years later, it implements a certain amount of innovations, and I don't like the word technology, but I'm going to have to use it, which we discovered over the years. So there's got a flying balance wheel, which we'd already invented on a legacy machine. It has a vertical power reserve indicator that nobody'd ever done, but we'd invented in the LM1. There was these incredible titanium eyes, which are semi-spheres, which we had invented on the Frog. The case, which is incredibly complex, made out of titanium and a sapphire, which we'd cut our teeth on the HM4 and HM6, etc., etc. So there is all this knowledge accumulated of all the risks we take for every new piece, but every new piece has to be something groundbreaking. And why is that? Because our engine as human beings, as part of the MB&F team, is pride. And pride comes from taking risks. Pride comes from doing something you're as best as you can, but it's also about getting out of your comfort zone. And so the whole creative process is about getting out of your comfort zone. And we share, I think, all of us in our little team, this whole pride of taking those risks, of doing something which doesn't make any business sense, financial sense, but we did it. We did it. That is so important. I was actually reflecting the other day that one of the points which makes me the most proud after these 19, soon 20 years is that we have done everything wrong in the last 19 years. Everything wrong if you go and do an MBA. Everything wrong if you go and read a management book. And they were basically everything they tell you not to do, we have done. And it actually worked. Now, don't get me wrong, we're not contrarians. We're not there just, oh, they say to go left, so we go right. We have, over the last 19 years, all of us decided on paths which resonated right. It was our true north. It seemed right. We knew that that's not what everybody else does. We knew that's not what management books said to do, but we would do what we felt right. And at the end of the day, life said it was okay. Life taught us that it was the right thing to do.
Have there been any decisions that majority of businesses wouldn't have taken, but you guys taken, and as a result, it's actually helped push the business far beyond what you'd expect?
But it started off with the fundamentals of the brand, which is and friends, which started off as crediting everybody we work with. We are in a very secretive industry where every brand likes to say we've done everything ourselves. So what are these hundreds of other artisans and companies doing? So we credit every single person. So you can go onto our website and find every single person who's worked on one of our pieces internally and externally. And that started off that way. It's also about, I think we were the very first to do collabs, real collabs, where we credit everybody we work with, and we let the other creator completely modify our pieces and even do something which we wouldn't have done ourselves. So that was decades ago. It also you see it in the fact of coming out with products where we know perfectly well there is no market. There is no market for a watch which looks like an airplane on your wrist. We're talking of the HM4, which came out in 2010. There is no market for a flying T, which was my first and only trial to do a watch for the women in my life, for my mum, my wife, and my daughter. And I created a 2 centimeter high, like a snowball, with a flying tourbillon at the center, which is completely vertical, which turns on itself, which was basically inspired my then 3-year-old daughter wanted to be a ballet dancer. And everybody will tell you, no, women, they want very thin watches, they don't want complications, etc., etc. And I said, I don't care. And I know that what I'm creating, there is no market for it. But I love that piece. We love that piece. It's incredible. And so it just continues. Look, MB&F is a brand which after 2021, that's what, 16 years, it started to be more or less institutionalized as a very small artisan, crazy creator. And what do? We come out with the M.A.D editions. So we are now recognized as an ultra high-end, hand-finished artisanal brand at 120, 150,000 US dollars. And we decide to come out with an industrially made product at 2,900. And I remember the few people I spoke to before were all very smart, knowledgeable people told me, do not do that. You're going to kill your brand. You are going to kill MB&F if you do that. And we did it. We did it because we wanted, because everybody around me can't afford my pieces. So there's a moment, as again, talking about pride, there's a moment about being proud of creating these incredible pieces of watchmaking. But if everybody you love can't afford them, what's the point of what you're doing? And decided I'm going to create something a bit crazy that my friends and family can afford. So that was M.A.D edition. And we initially only kept it for friends and family. And then social media took hold of it and everything went crazy. And now we have raffles where we have maybe 1,000 or 1,500 pieces to to allocate, and there are 35,000 people who register for it now. And it hasn't killed MB&F, quite the contrary. It's actually boosted MB&F, where it's just given that, wow, these guys are really taking risks out there. And also because everything we do, now how I put this, the creative is egocentric. We create what we believe in, and it's the only way we can create something groundbreaking, because if we can consistently thinking what will people like, we're never going to create anything. And so we're very egocentric in our creativity, but as a company and the way we speak to and we treat people who either own our pieces or love what we do, we're incredibly empathetic. We're always thinking, if I was that person, how would I like to be treated? And again, treat people the way you would want to be treated. So it's very weird. It's this mix of being incredibly altruistic and incredibly egocentric, and that's one of the many defining points of MB&F.
With every sort of new watch you guys put together and create, where does your fingerprint come in, Max? Are you usually the person that designed it and sketched it out? How far along into the process of it becoming a watch are you involved in?
So, except for the legacy sequential and the legacy perpetual, who are the brainchildren of the genius Stephen McDonnell, pretty much all the other pieces are my ideas. So I will usually sketch a really bad sketch and work with my old friend Eric Giroux, who's been designing alongside me for the last 20 years, and transform that into a 3D design we love. Then we go into engineering. That was up till now. But even though I don't have many gray hairs, and I still don't know why, because I'm 57, there is a point now where I have to start thinking of the next step. And what happens if something happens to me? So I've discovered this extraordinary young designer whose name is also Max, and that's really not on purpose. And so Max and I have been working together over the last 3 years, and he's come out with an incredible array of new ideas, which you're going to be seeing in the years to come. And slowly nurturing him to be the next creative director of this company. While I definitely hope I will be there for a very, very long time, but I have to, as a responsible company owner, make sure that if something happens to me, there is la relève, how do you say, the next generation is there to take care of it.
I was listening to this interview with Jerry Seinfeld, the comedian, and back in his heyday, he said every day he has to write one joke. He has to put together one joke and he can cross it off in the calendar, and he did that every single day for like 10 years. Do you have like a daily exercise? Do you try to make one sketch on your iPad every day? Is there something of that sort, or are you sort of just doing what needs to be done each and every day?
Well, first of all, I work with a pencil and paper still, and that sort of dates me. And I actually do not force any creative process. At least it doesn't work with me. So I will admit that over the last 19 years, there have been moments where for months and months and months, I didn't create anything. And 10 years ago, it would terrify me, thinking, that's it. That's it. It's finished. I've said everything I wanted to say. I've written all the books I wanted to write. And it's finished. And then suddenly, a couple of months later, I don't know, I'm sitting in the garden, because that's also, there's a routine I have actually done since I have a garden now in the last 10 years, is to sit in the garden without any phone and to block an hour sitting doing nothing. You know that can seem like eternity, especially today with this young generation. Just sitting and thinking. And you can think about everything from things in your personal life to your professional life. It could be business. But mostly I tend to try and anchor it into having an idea, exploring ideas. And I would do that at some point once a week. And I'm actually sad because I don't really have the time. I haven't given myself the time recently to do that anymore. But there's also a reason to that because I've had so many ideas in the last, especially during COVID. COVID was insane because I was blocked at home. And so there were so many ideas came up during COVID that we have a list today of ideas which could easily bring us to 2032, 2034. So when I come up with a new idea I just had yesterday to the team, they just look at me and go, okay, so what is it, 2035? And that's horrible. That is horrible because, and that's one of the drawbacks of being a creator in beautiful mechanical watchmaking, is there are incompressible times to engineer what we do. And therefore, it's not as if I have a really cool idea and then 3 weeks later it comes out. Whatever I do is 3 to 5 years in front. And as we already have so many ideas which we're engineering as we speak, they just look at me like, okay, do you want me to stop this and start something else? Do you want to put it at the end of the queue? And so I've actually stopped. And also, this also allows the other Max to bring his ideas, because if I've already saturated the pipeline, what is his job going to be? So I have to give him space to come up with ideas. And he's got an insane amount of ideas. So we have to actually plug his into that canvas.
Does your taste evolve over time and technological advancements and things you learn where you're like, hey, that design I came up with 2 years ago that's scheduled for 2028, I actually think I could do better? Or is everything locked in?
No, it's not locked in because clearly over the years, and that's typically, I was talking to you about the Bulldog before. It doesn't take 8 years to engineer the Bulldog. Probably took 2.5 to 3 years. But I kept on not being happy with first the design. And then I left it on the side because there was something more important that had to come out for whatever reason. And then you go back to it a couple of years later and you go, you know what? We can make it better. We could do this, we could do that. And I found, even though it is insanely frustrating, I've found that actually letting an idea lie for 6 months or a couple of years and going back to it makes it much better. And I can't explain it, but don't get me wrong, there are ideas which we just bulldozed through and it was immediately great. But I find that if we let it rest a little bit and go back to it, it's often better. Now, there's one point we have to be careful of here, is at MB&F, as I said, we never create thinking of who would be interested in it. It's creative centric, it's not client centric, the creativity. But that creativity has evolved. If I look at my HM1 that I came out with in 2007, today I look at it with a lot of fondness, but go, my God, I would never create that today. Never. And when I created MB&F, I only had that piece in mind, which is absolutely nuts. I created a company with just one design and knowing I didn't have enough money. And now, 21 calibres later, I realize I didn't have any idea of what was going to come out in the future. And the pieces I'm working on today are dramatically different from that HM1. So that means my creative process has changed, my creative tastes have changed, what makes me happy today as a creator is not at all what used to make me happy 20 years ago. So if you leave a product too long on the side and you go back to it, you have maybe gone on to another phase of your creative life. And you look at it and you go like, I don't want this. This was me 5 years ago. This was me 10 years ago. I don't think this should be anymore. It's as if you ask an artist, a painter, to go and paint the paintings he used to do 10 or 15 years ago. He or she will probably look at you and go, no, I'm experimenting on this today. I don't want to do that anymore. So you have to be very careful of not letting a product too long on the side because you're never going to go back to it.
Max, given that you've gone through 21 calibers over the last 20 or so years, and you talk about having 8 calibers always being in cycle, does that mean you're still producing watches that were released 10 years ago, 8 years ago?
Let's see, the in brackets oldest caliber we still in production is the Perpetual, which came out in 2015. So that will be, it's 9 years old. But what we have to get into a discipline of, and it's very tough, is that every time we come up with a new caliber, we have to stop another one. Now, it wasn't that tough 10 years ago, because now we've been living over the last 3 years this dream where suddenly thousands of people have come to us going, how can I get one of your pieces? That was not always the case. For the first 16 years of MB&F, it was rough. I had to travel around the world extensively to try and find a few hundreds of people who would actually resonate on the same wavelength as us and have the means to buy one of our pieces. This has completely changed. So I've lost my train of thoughts on that one. What was the initial question? Sorry.
Now we have
Yes, we have to stop. Yes, stop the calibers. So in those days, a caliber's life would be at the maximum 4 years. Nobody would want it after 4 years. Now, our perpetual calendar, which came out in 2015, we have 2 to 3 years waiting list on it still today. So we have waiting lists today on virtually everything we do. And this is very new for us to have to stop a product where people have been waiting for years for it and having to tell them, well, I'm sorry, we can't do it anymore. And the guy's like, well, I've been waiting for 2 years for this. Okay, but maybe we can suggest something else. No, I want this. So this is another issue with suddenly discovering which we never had. Yes, success always has another side of the medal.
How do you decide the volume or quantity that you make for each design? I guess you just sort of keep making it until you have to replace it with a new caliber. So I guess there really isn't a set amount, is there?
No, there is some sort of rationale to what we do. It depends on the initial investment of how many years and how many millions of Swiss francs we've had to invest in the R&D, and some pieces are much more R&D intensive than others and take much longer. And of course, it depends on the price. And so we will usually need to, I'm going to say, every caliber would need to bring in something between 8 to 12 million Swiss francs of revenue in its life. That could take 4 years, as it could take 8 years. Then it depends on also because, so from 2013 to 2020, I didn't want my company to grow. And there were years we could have done much more, but it was point of, I just like the size of my company where it is. Then 2020, the demand went ballistic and we increased a little bit. So we went from about 280 watches a year to about 400 watches a year. And now in 2023, last year, I said, this is it. This is a new plateau. We're not going to grow for the next 4 to 5 years, whatever happens. So now it's this jigsaw puzzle. So when we come up with a new piece, how do we instill it into that, for those 400 pieces, which means always that we have to stop something else or do less of something else. And as I said, it's become more complicated because there's demand on everything. But we're not going to stop creating, because that is the whole raison d'être, is the whole reason of MB&F. It's about creating. So we will continue creating. We have about 9 calibres in the pipeline. And we are going to have to stop some which are still in demand, and I'm sorry about that.
If you have 9 calibers in the pipeline and you're currently selling 8, does that mean the current 8 is going to be replaced with the new 9? Or will there be a caliber that somehow survives and it's still selling after you replace 9? You replace one caliber twice.
I can't remember who said, the only thing I'm sure of is I'm sure of nothing. So I'm going to give you that weird answer because there is no certainty. We don't actually, it's pretty crazy. We don't even have like this spreadsheet where we see all the different products coming out, where we know that this is going to be stopped and that's going to, or we know what's going to come out, but we don't know what we're going to kill because killing a product is so difficult for us today. So we keep on procrastinating as much as we can to postpone that moment because it's so tough for us.
Within the company, what has been the bottleneck? Is it the watchmakers? And is the reason why you chose to keep chose to not grow? You talk about not wanting to grow for the next 2, 3 years. Is that because finding watchmakers, training watchmakers, it's hard? Or is there another reason why you've chose not to grow for the next 2, 3 years?
Amazingly, the watchmakers have not been the bottleneck.
Wow.
We have stacks of resumes of watchmakers asking to come and work for us because of the way we work. So that has never been a big issue. No, the issue has been number one has been hand finishing. We are one of a handful of watch brands where every bridge is angled by hand, where every engraving is engraved by hand. Does it make it better? Probably not, but that's the watchmaking I love, where everybody's gone machine finished. We work by hand, and there are very few people, artisans, who have the talent to be able to do that. And you were talking about the youngsters not becoming watchmakers. It doesn't seem to be an issue for watchmakers. It's a massive issue on hand finishers. Now, imagine you're 20 years old, you're 16 years old, you're 18 years old. Do you think your dream is going to be for the rest of your life to be filing an angle on a bridge with a file? That's a tough one. We have stopped giving value to artisanship. Everything is tech today. Everything has to go fast. Everything has to be something which is a dopamine driven job. Watchmaking is a dopamine driven job. Hand finishing is a very different animal. So yes, we that's our biggest bottleneck today. The other bottleneck is I don't want my team to grow because this startup attitude we've had for the last 19 years is incredible. Who manages for 20 years to keep up a startup attitude? This fact of everybody feeling in the team that they are part of something greater. They're part of a story which is being written, which is amazing, and everybody's proud of that. And up till very recently, we didn't have any middle management. It was one of our mantras. No middle management. Now we're just going to hit 60 in the team, and now we have to have a few people in that intermediate level, and that's sort of scaring the hell out of me because I hope it's not going to change the way we all interact together, and we're so proud of what we do. So, and that's it. I don't want the company to grow.
I love that, Max. When you talk about sort of hand finishing, I guess, for example, the watch you have on your wrist, which parts of it could be done with a machine, but you guys use a human's hands to do?
So typically well, actually all the metal components, which is 581 in mine, um, the bridges will be angled. That angle on the side of the bridge will be done by a human being on a microscope with a file and angling it out, and that allows you to have what you call inner angles. And inner angles can only be done by hand. No machine can do that. And so we on purpose make our lives miserable to put inner angles to prove that it's hand finished. Then, of course, as I said, the engraving, the polishing, all the steel parts, the polishing is polished by hand, etc. The bridge of this legacy machine, which is like this wishbone, it takes about, I think we're at about, the last numbers I saw, I think we're like 30 hours which is more or less 4 days to polish that bridge because it's not spherical, it's toric, and so it's incredibly complex to do.
What is a bridge? Like, are you able to show us on your watch? Is it visible?
So typically, that wishbone you see here, which holds the balance wheel, that part which is completely three-dimensional and is polished, that is incredibly complex. Otherwise, on the back, let me just take this off.
And that wishbone, you're saying a machine could do it?
No machine can do that. That's
I
impossible. And here on the bridges, on the side of the bridges, there are angles which are polished. And you've got Côte de Genève, which is done by hand, of course, etc. So all of that um, is done by a human being who's got an incredible talent with his or her tool who manages to do that. Again, does it make it work better? No, but that's what we signed up for.
How long would one of your watches last? Have you worn one for a long time and it's still going? Is there average lifetime of one of your pieces?
So the beauty of mechanical watchmaking when it's done specifically like us, even though it's very innovative, it's done with steel and brass and it's machined in the old ways, is that even if something happens to it and it stops for whatever reason, in 100 years, a mechanic and a watchmaker will be able to remake a part or repair a part and remake it work. We are capable today to take a 1700s pocket watch and give it life again. That's the beauty of mechanical watchmaking. Now, watchmaking is a mechanical object with parts moving, with lubrication, and it needs oil. And that is why, like with a car engine, we ask for a service from time to time. Do many people actually give their watch back for service? Unfortunately, very few. And not only in MB&F, generally speaking. For whatever reason, everybody buys these very expensive pieces of machinery, which are incredibly complex and very, very small, and they wear them till they stop. And so, yeah, so we asked them, please, like every 4 to 5 years, you could send it back and we will dismantle it, clean it completely, change any parts which have been worn, and re-oil it and reassemble it. But virtually nobody does that. So suddenly, after 8 or 10 years, there's no more oil. The gears have started grinding each other. And yeah, sure, the wear will at some point either it's going to start losing time or even stop. But it's this, you would never think of driving 100,000 kilometers in your car and not taking it for a service. You wouldn't think of that, but in the watchmaking world, for whatever reason, nobody thinks it's necessary. So yes, if you don't give it a service, watches at some point will grind to a halt. It has to happen. It's obligatory.
I'm from like the e-commerce space and I've worked with a lot of clothing brands, small products, toys. So we've never had to think about creating a repair team because it doesn't make sense to have people repairing a $50 shirt. Have you had to build a whole section, a team just for repairs? Do watches often come into the repair team, or do people that are making watches work on repairs when repairs come in, or is that a complete separate sector?
So originally, when we started, every watchmaker would be responsible for his or her repair if it came back. Now, over soon 20 years, we will have put soon 4,000 MB&Fs into the market and over 21 calibers. So we do have returns, especially as people don't send them back for service. And so what's absolutely mind-boggling is that last year, the amount of repairs which came in was 74, which is incredibly low. But we had 120 to 150 watches come back for service for the first time. We were thinking, scratching our head like, wow, people are finally being responsible. No, what was happening is the demand of MB&F having grown so much and being absolutely no watches in any stores available, people were starting to buy secondhand watches because the only way they could get their hands on one. And when you buy a 100,000 Swiss franc secondhand watch, there is no problem in sending it back for service to make sure that it's been taken care of, because your service is going to cost you 3,000, 3% of the price of your watch. So we suddenly got hundreds of pieces coming back into service, but repairs only 74, which was absolutely mind-boggling. We have in stock tens of thousands of components of calibers that we don't make anymore, which are there to ensure the repairs and service of those calibers into the next 50 years. So every time we stop a caliber, we will continue producing components for the equivalent of easily 1,000,000 Swiss francs of components, which we will keep in stock to ensure that everything can be repaired over the decades to come. That's part of being a responsible brand. I'm not sure everybody does that, but we do.
I love it's like, yeah, it's very consumer centric, very putting the customers first. You talked about a lot of watch owners buying it from the second-hand market, sort of, I guess, chrono, sort of other dealers, I guess. What does the retail versus resale market look like for your brand? And is it something you follow, Max?
We have to. So up till 2020, it was completely normal that if you bought a beautiful watch, a bit like when you bought a beautiful car, after a few years, you'd lose your shirt. It was part of the way it functioned. I mean, the guy who bought a Ferrari 458 when the 488 came out, he knew he'd take a bath on his 458. It's normal. And that's the way it functioned. And then suddenly there was a whole speculative bubble, and everybody started looking at what's the secondary market price. We're fortunate because our production is much lower than demand, is that our secondary market prices are over retail, sometimes around retail, some of the more eccentric pieces under retail, but not too far. But it's part of, I'm going to say, one of our biggest goals is to make sure that whatever happens, our secondary market is not too far off our retail price. And it also explains why suddenly demand went crazy, because up till 2020, I'll say only insane lovers would buy an MB&F. People who loved what we did and knew they were going to take a bath if they tried to sell it. It was okay because they were so in love that I don't care. And suddenly when secondary price started getting close to retail price, not even going over, just getting close, 10 times more people started wanting the pieces. And we realized, asking these people, like, how come now? And they said, I've always admired what you did. I've always admired MB&F, but I was not ready to lose 50K. So now I know I can actually buy one. And if I have to lose 5, 10, 15, again, it's a lot of money, don't get me wrong. But for people who spend 100 to 150 or 200, it's not that much. It's okay. And that explained why it was not that much new collectors who came into the brand. It was people who'd been following us for many years and now said, now it makes sense. So yes, definitely, we need to be a responsible brand, and we need to make sure that the secondary market is always at an acceptable level.
When you look at your customers, Max, are most of them like artists, collectors, investors, entrepreneurs, people in music? What do your customers look like?
So I've discovered over the years, because I didn't know any when I had potential customers when I started, clearly a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot. It's not what defines them, but there are a lot of them. I can tell you that they're very interesting psychological profiles. Because when you buy an MB&F, you're typically not buying for status. So that is a different human being than 80, 90% of the market. People who come into the brand are very self-aware. They are totally okay that nobody knows what they're wearing. They're totally okay that nobody knows the price of what they're wearing. And they're totally okay with people not understanding their choices. And that is quite a remarkable human being. And therefore, we call them the tribe. The tribe is made up of an insane amount of remarkable human beings from LA to Paris to Singapore to Taipei to you name it. They have different upbringings, different religions, different stories, but they end up being very similar in psyche. And that's very, very interesting. And I'm blessed. I'm blessed to have some incredibly interesting customers who've become very good friends. So they resonate on the same wavelength as us, and we're a very, very specific wavelength.
Max, are there any products that you own that you're completely in love with? No one would know its value, and it's sort of along the same lines of what you try to create with your watch brand. Is there like a random kettle, a random bottle that you're like, this is something that you see, like it's just amazing to you, and no one would know?
Oh, of course, it can be in furniture. It can be in art. I mean, in furniture, I've gone down the Finn Juhl rabbit hole of the Danish great furniture designer. I went to Copenhagen, went to visit the house he built himself, and he designed all the furniture. I went to see where they made it. It was like, again, people who come to our home, they like it usually because they're beautiful, but they don't understand it. And if they know the value, they'll go, "What are you doing?" But it's again, it's just I find the story amazing. I drive a pretty amazing car, which is called a Wiesmann. The brand unfortunately went bankrupt. So I bought mine in 2011. I think it went bankrupt around 2013, 2014. And I find such a stunning handcrafted car. They used to make like 150 a year at the most, and nobody would buy them. And it's incredible because people stop me in the street. I mean, I'm at traffic lights. People come up to me like, "Excuse me, what is this car?" And it's the price of it's a price of a Porsche, a well-equipped Porsche. It looks like nothing, you know, but everybody loves it. I was like, wow, this is so beautiful. And Porsche makes what, 200,000 cars, and Wiesmann was making 150, and they couldn't even find enough people to survive. And again, uh, that's amongst many other examples. And even it can go into restaurants I go to where the chef is the owner, and he basically is, oh, this morning I went to the market and I found this produce, and I'm making this special dish for you. That resonates with me compared to the oh yeah, I'm going to make a lot of friends again. The Zumas and Nobus and all these other brands, which you ate very well, don't get me wrong, but it's the same menu everywhere in every city and every day of the year. And it's a brand. And I'm more interested to go into a small restaurant where the chef is the owner.
I love that. Any specific clothing brands you're into? Like what type of shirts, pants, shoes? Do you like to get it custom made, or are there some Italian brands that you follow?
You know, I spent such an insane amount of money in my clothes in a previous life. And when I decided to create MB&F, and I had put all my savings in it, I knew it was not enough. And I knew that I would never be wearing a coat and tie anymore because that was the end of that era. I opened up my cupboard and I had, I don't know, 20, 25 uh, tailored suits, which I had made in Paris. I would go there, and because in my Harry Winston days, I was making a lot of money and I was spending a lot of money in that. And I looked at that and I was like, what's the point of all of this? And I sold all of them on the second hand for 10 cents on the dollar. I sold on eBay my ties, my Bulgari ties, my Armani ties, my whatever. I would always take photos in the evening, put them up on eBay and sell them for $20. And it was cathartic. It was like, of course, it made no sense economically what I was doing, but it's just like that's the end of that part of my life. And I'm not Steve Jobs, where I've got the same black turtleneck and jeans, but I'm pretty close to that now. It's actually, I'm going to make a bit of advertising for a brand I think is incredible. It's a t-shirt brand called Son of a Tailor, which I actually discovered on Instagram. And I kept on seeing these ads. I was like, I'm not going to buy something on Instagram. And one day I was like, you know what? I'm going to try. And they basically tailor the t-shirts to you. And they cost about $50. And so I tried. I ordered 3 t-shirts and basically gave my measurements or whatever it was. And I got the 3 t-shirts and they were awful. Absolutely. I mean, they gave me a total dad bod. It was horrible, horrible stuff. And so I wrote to these guys. I'm like, guys, this is horrible. And they're like, oh, sorry. Could you please send us photos of you in the t-shirt, like in mugshots, like front, side, everything. Like, okay. So I took photos, sent it to them. And then somebody came online and said, look, well, we think we should take 1 centimeter off here, 1 centimeter more there. And I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about, guys. But if you think it's better, okay. So then I didn't hear from them for a couple of days. And I sent them a message like, so how do I order these new 3 t-shirts with my good size? And I get a message saying 3 t-shirts are going to be sent to you free of charge. Really? And the 3 t-shirts were great. And since then, that was like 3 years ago, I've ordered, I don't know, 50 t-shirts when the colors start fading, whatever. And even sometimes they stray. Because and also my body is changing, not in the right way, and so I send them like, guys, now it's a bit too tight here, or the collar is becoming too wide. What's happening? Oh, sorry, and they send me 3 more new t-shirts with a smaller collar, and they readapt each time. I've been absolutely blown away by their customer service and the fact that this is actually a brand which cares, and I can have my own t-shirts made for me, and they cost $50. I don't need to go and spend 500 for them. So that's a good example. I didn't expect to be talking about them, so I'm happy to give them a hand because they do a great job, and they're all made in Portugal and in Europe. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, like sort of I'm starting to learn that, it's the cut, how it fits you. That's sort of what is important. And some brands just somehow make beautiful cuts that fit a lot of people, and some brands don't really focusing on the cut. So I guess making it custom is even better. That's sort of like the best of the best.
Makes sense. We all have all these different sizes and bodies, shapes, and whatever. And an M and L and XL is never going to fit everybody the same way. And I remember when I used to go a lot to Japan because I love Japan, and I would go into these department stores, and they always had these incredible brands I'd never heard of, and I would buy sweaters, and I'm an M usually, but an M in Japan is made for like it would arrive up till here. Yeah, I had to get it like L or XL because, of course, an M in Japan was not the same as it. So it just actually does make sense if in that price point, if you can get something tailor-made, well, great.
When you're talking about sort of customer service, it made me think of how you talked about how all your team, they're all invested in the vision. You have that startup culture that you mentioned. What is the brand vision for you, Max?
So, and I'm always afraid of repeating myself, but for the longest time, as I told you, for me, it was easy. It was just being proud as a human being, proud as a creator, proud as an entrepreneur. And that was the defining point of MB&F. But then we started becoming 30, 40, 50 people in the team. And we had to sit down about 2 years ago now, 3 years ago, and try and define the why of MB&F. And it was incredible because in like half an hour, we nailed it. And I was so proud. I was so proud because, interestingly, there was no watchmaking involved. Watchmaking is my life. I've been creating watches since 1991. It's what makes me happy and what makes me proud. But I was very proud that there was no watchmaking in the why, because the why we all together found is that MB&F is here to inspire people to create more, to take more risks. And originally it was to think different. And over the last 3 years, it's evolved into actually finding your true north. Because we don't want people to be contrarians. That's stupid. That's pointless. It's just do what you feel is right. And if you see what MB&F has been able to do with such little means, with such an incredible ethos over the last 20 years, maybe that will help you in your life, in your world, whatever it is, to go that extra mile, get out of your comfort zone, take that extra risk you've been dreaming of doing, but you never dared do. And that is the raison d'être. That's the reason our brand today exists. And that makes me very proud.
And I guess you sort of show that by every new caliber, you're stretching the limit, you're making something even more crazy, and that, I guess, would show that, hey, like if you own one of our watches, you like to do crazy things.
You, well, you don't have to own one of our watches to be inspired. Yeah, and that I get so many messages on social media because I actually answer everybody who DMs me, which is quite a job, I have to say. I don't know how long I'll be able to sustain that. Where people write to me and say, look, I'll never be able to afford one of your pieces, but thank you. Thank you for existing. And in my world, I'm going to try and do this. In my life, I'm going to try and do this. And that's what I'll take with me the last day of my life. The watches will be there as a souvenir of this whole story. They'll be the medium we used. But having inspired people to take a few more risks and to feel more true to themselves, that's a much larger goal in life.
I remember watching this interview from Kanye West. He was talking about his Yeezys, his shoes, these $250 sneakers that were just selling out the secondary market. It was way more expensive. People were struggling to get them. And he said, my goal is to have everyone wear Yeezys and I can sell them at $10 a piece and everyone can have access to this beautiful sneaker I've produced. And just hearing him talk about wanting everyone to have access to what he makes, it was like really inspiring to hear.
Well, that's a little bit what we did with the M.A.D editions.
Yeah.
It's like being blocked because there is no way we can make them less pricey on MB&F the way we function on the engineering and the machining and the hand finishing, etc., and the small quantities. That's why we did M.A.D edition. So I have this for the moment challenge is that then the next M.A.D editions, there's one an extra M.A.D one, special one coming out in September, but then there'll be M.A.D 2 and M.A.D 3 and M.A.D 4. I'm trying to stay at 2,900 francs. And every time I come with these ideas, my team looks at me like, there's no way we can get to that price. Like, okay, so what? How can we? And okay, okay. If we make much less money, it's okay. But we're going to try and stay at 2,900 francs, which is, don't get me wrong, still an insanely expensive watch, but it's not 150,000. And we try and give incredible value for money at 2,900. And it's maybe 25% of our company today in revenue. And I don't want it to be more because it could very easily be much more because the demand is so insane on it. And if I wanted, I could just open the floodgates, but I don't want it because I'm very scared that M.A.D edition is going to kill MB&F. So I keep it at that size.
How do you go about manufacturing the M.A.D edition? And how do you go ahead and pick manufacturers that you can trust and rely on? Because you've been making watches by hand and you have all your watchmakers in the M.A.D house. This, mass producing is a completely different thing. How did you go about that?
So we had to find completely new ecosystems to make this come to life. We work with a Swiss company based in Switzerland, which sources a certain amount of components in Asia, of course, because otherwise there's no way you get to that price. And we're very clear about that. We're very clear that it's sourced in Asia. And they had the ecosystem. they'd been working already for other Swiss brands. And so they knew what who to go and speak to, and we work a lot on prototyping, where if they can't make the prototype of what we have in mind, right, just don't even go there. And they find solutions, and then of course we do a pre-series, make sure that's still great, and then you know that all the MAD editions are the movements are modified in Switzerland. They're then assembled in Switzerland, cased and quality control in Switzerland. It's not, we don't subcontract that to some Asian company and then sign, which sends directly to the customer. So it's a lot is done in Switzerland. Actually, it's amazing that we could actually even engrave Swiss made on the watch, but we wouldn't do that because I don't think it's right.
When Rolex sells a Submariner for $8,000, how much does it actually cost Rolex to make that Submariner? You see fake Submariners in China selling for $200-300. Does it cost $200-300 to make a Submariner?
No, of course not. Of course not. I can't answer that specific question already because I have no idea how much it costs Rolex to do it. What I can tell you, as I told you before, it's the greatest value for money at that price point in our industry. It's and a company with an incredible ethic. Now, we're not talking of fashion margins, we're not talking of perfume margins, but we're also talking of an industry where your R&D is so humongous, and in our case, if I just take our case, how do you amortize 5 years of R&D over 100 pieces, which are going to be crafted over maybe 4 years, 25 a year? Things like that, which come into this equation. And what's interesting also is there's a point where today I feel, and this doesn't go for Rolex because again, as I said, I'm their number one fan. We're in a world, and this doesn't only apply to watchmaking, where there's a decorrelation between price and value. People are ready to spend $1,000 on a t-shirt. I mean, seriously? How much can that t-shirt cost? But because the brand logo, which is on it, is worth maybe 99% of the value of the t-shirt. And I find it a little bit sad that the world is going down that this decorrelation of price and value. And it also comes to the fact that many consumers don't know how a product is made, and they give so much more importance to the branding than to the product itself. And we who are in artisanal watchmaking, we look at this going, how is that even possible? and so but who am I to judge? It's if the person who buys it is happy, and in some cases they can even resell it for more. And again, I'm talking of that t-shirt or that handbag or whatever. It's fine.
When it comes to $500 t-shirts, is there a difference between like a $500 Louis Vuitton Gucci shirt versus like a Loro Piana, Brunello Cucinelli, Zegna $500 t-shirt? Or do you reckon they're all the same where you're paying 99% for brand?
I have no idea. And I'm not trying to be Swiss and diplomatic. I have no idea. It's not my world. You should go and interview them and ask them how this is made.
Talking about wait lists, do you go direct to consumer or do you still work with authorized dealers? How do you go about distributing your watches?
So I'm going to say today 20 to 25% of the pieces we go direct to consumers, and 75 to 80% is through our ADs, so our authorized retailers. Could we go much more direct? Of course, our waiting list direct are gigantic. But these authorized retailers have helped us over the last 19 years, or at least the first 16, to build this brand. And again, wouldn't it be wrong to let them now drop because it's easy to sell direct? So we really have, so we've cut a certain amount of distribution. We're now down to only 14 retailers in the world who represent us in 10 countries. But these are the partners we want to continue working with, and we reinforce our relationship. We reinforce working together, and I am incredibly happy that their lives are much easier with MB&F than they were the first 16 years, because they were they were working so hard for the first decade and a half, and I wouldn't be talking to you today if they weren't there. So now I'm very happy that their lives are much easier.
If there's like an entrepreneur that's watching this and they want a MBMF piece, what would your advice be? Find a dealer in a nearby country? Is there a wait list on the website? What's your advice?
First of all, we try and make sure that customers who have an AD in their country are served by that AD. So, I mean, we can't force them, but that's what we would prefer. Now we're only in 10 countries. How many countries are there in the world? 170, 250? I don't know. It's like hundreds of countries. So for those 10 countries, there is an AD where you can go to. For all the others, you can go to one of those ADs or you can come to us. And don't get offended if we want to start a conversation with you before we ever allocate something. It's just because it's very important for us that our pieces find a loving home. And for the last 3 years, we've had to it's been very difficult to make sure that we were not delivering a watch to what we call flippers. So we've got so many people that actually want to wear it, who love them, who've been following us for years. And then it would be horrible that we sell it to some dude who immediately sells it for a profit on Carousel or Chrono24. That would make us very sad. So we have to just make sure that the people who actually are coming into the brand actually want to. And don't get me wrong, also, we're not that brand who will blacklist you if you sell it after a year. I mean, it's your watch. You've bought it. You want to sell it. You sell it, of course. But what drives us nuts is the guys who buy them and then 3 weeks or 3 months later flip them. That's just wrong. And it's wrong not because we don't want you to make money. It's wrong because there were hundreds and thousands of people who actually want to wear them and enjoy wearing them. But we're not going to stop you selling a watch after a couple of years because for whatever reason, it's your watch. You do whatever you want with it. Just don't flip it.
I really love how on your website you have like a secondary market or page where people like that's so cool.
That's something we started, I think, in 2017, 2018. It was just, again, treat people the way you want to be treated. It was trying to help our customers. So on one side, there were clients who wanted to find a watch which was no more in any store because we didn't produce it anymore. And buying a watch on the secondary market can be a bit hairy, especially in those days. I got a little bit better. And so we would actually go and source that watch and ask our existing customers, like, do you want to sell it? Because we've got somebody who wants to buy it. And then, of course, there were clients who said, look, I'm not wearing it anymore. I've already got 5. I don't know, whatever reason. Can you find somebody? But we kept one base. It had to be a watch which was no more in production. And we stick to that today. It has to be a watch which is no more in production because we were not there to compete on the watches which were at our ADs. And that was always the base. So now there are no watches at our ADs, but we still kept that mantra. It has to be a watch which is no more in production.
And you talked about people can go on the wait list online. You guys might give them a call. Is it similar to an AD where like customers can build a relationship with the representative that allocates watches? How does it work, or is there anything of that sort, or is it a luck in the draw?
I can't speak for our ADs. For sure, They will also take some risks, and they also want to know the person because they've got the same responsibility we have. And we ask them, please allocate to people who actually love what we do. So they have got that homework to do. Now, you can't stop an AD who's got a client who's bought 10, 15, 20 very expensive pieces, whatever the brands for them, to maybe favor that person, contrary to somebody who's just arrived and say, hey, hello, I want that piece that everybody wants. Please give it to me, but I've never bought anything from you. It's human. I mean, you can't stop them from, of course, delivering first the piece to their client who's been a faithful client. And we've done that. When the demand went crazy, the first thing we ensured was that people who followed us from the first 16 years would get first refusal. Because the new customers who suddenly arrived when the brand is hot, wonderful. But let's never forget that the brand wouldn't be today if the people didn't buy them when it was not hot. So they always are there before. It's not a question of money they spent with us, it's they were there for us when it was incredibly tough. So we'll always be there for them today. So that, yeah, that's how it works. It's different probably from every AD to.
Max, what are three type of watches? One, what's your most used watch? Two, what's a watch you wear to black tie events? And three, do you have any like collector's dream of a watch that you keep in careful storage and it's like a collector's dream?
So we're talking MB&F here.
Any watches or brands for you personally?
So I love watches, and I've got a big collection. I keep on buying watches, which are not my brand. It's where everything I have goes to, except for my family. Watches is my life. So yes, the watch I wear the most, I will say, is my legacy machine Perpetual Evo, which I'm wearing today. And just because, first of all, the story of the two calibers that Stephen McDonnell created, the Perpetual and the sequential, who he is, the hardship he's gone through in his life, the genius he has to create those two movements is mind-boggling. And so when I look at my watch, I don't only look at a beautiful piece of watchmaking, I look at the story of a human being who is exceptional in every way. So I think that's very important for me, is the relationship between the human beings and the piece. So many and most of my watches are independent watchmakers' watches, and I know what they've gone through. I mean, when I wear my Uhrwerk, I know what Felix and Martin went through. When I wear my Kari, I know what he went, etc., etc. And so all these, and many of the people I worked with, I've got a watch from every person I've worked with. It's important for me because it's a souvenir of that person and of the story together. So it's very humane. The black tie event, I will avoid as much as possible any black tie event. It is so no more the person I am, and I will definitely try not to go. And that, what was the last one?
Collector's
The
dream.
Grail watch? No, what was it?
A collector's dream of a watch.
There are a few. I'll just mention one, just because the creator is so unknown, and contrary to many of my colleagues who are rock stars in the watch industry, is a gentleman called Beat Haldimann. His workshop is in Thun in the German part of Switzerland. He's been creating watches for easily more than 30 years. He creates virtually everything himself, still on hand-driven machines. He has no CNC, and he creates some of the most beautiful classic watches ever. His H1 and H2 are absolutely stunning, and he probably does one H2 a year and 2 or 3 H1s a year. And so Beat Haldimann, I shouldn't give you his name because then afterwards hundreds of people are going to order watches from him. But and he doesn't need it because he's already got a very long waiting list. But I like to give a help to somebody who's less known than the other rock stars.
How do you spell his name?
I'm going to have to stop here. I'm losing my voice. I'm sorry. It's been an hour and 40 minutes now. So thank you very much for this.
Last two questions we wrap these up with. One, any recent discoveries you have implemented to your life, Max?
Sorry, I didn't get that. What?
Any recent discoveries that you've implemented to your day-to-day life?
Um, I've cut sugar in my life. I've only one addiction. I had only one addiction, which was sugar. And I used to eat like a slab of chocolate a day and desserts and put sugar in my tea all the time and everything like that. And I realized that this is probably the biggest killer in today's world. And so I've drastically stopped sugar and I feel so much better, so much fitter, so much sharper. It's incredible. And some of our one of my clients of our clients is an incredibly famous person in the health world, and he's also told me that a few years back. He said, "Look, Coke should be banned as much as heroin should be banned." And so yeah, so I've cut that.
And the last question is, any personal goals or focus over the next 6 months for you, Max?
What I would like is to spend much more time with my family. My two daughters are 7 and 11, and it's just it's that pivotal moment in their lives where I know that when they'll be teenagers, I won't exist anymore. So I've got this, and I don't know how I'm going to actually make that happen, but it's a very important goal for me.
I love that, Max. Max, where can people get more of you?
Oh God, I don't know if anybody wants more of me. Well, actually, YouTube has pretty much changed my life because before YouTube, I'm saying YouTube, before the last 3, 4 years, um, I had to travel like a madman and just to meet people and to have these conversations that I'm having with you. And today, thanks to podcasts, YouTube, there've been a certain amount of interviews where you can actually listen to me if you really feel like listening to me. And I'm sorry if you do, because I do repeat myself because my story is always the same and my thoughts are the same. So often 3, 2, 3, 4 times you'll think, oh my God, the guy's always saying the same thing, but that's who I am. So yeah, of course you've got Instagram and things like that, but yeah. I'm trying desperately to be less visible because I want to spend more time with the family.
Given that, I'm very appreciative for your time and presence today, Max. I love how present you are. You're so customer centric. You're like a true artist, and you're so consistent and you're so yourself. And I love that initial beginning where you talked about you sort of just being yourself and throwing away the need to sort of be like everyone else. And that was really inspirational. And I can just feel the passion that you have for what you do through the screen. And I definitely know that the audience feels it as well. So thank you.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure, and I hope this sort of inspires or engages a few people to go, oh yeah, I could go a little bit crazier, and I could take a few more risks, and that would make me happy. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Max. Guys, if you made it this far into the episode, thank you so much for your time, and I'll see you next week on another episode. Peace.
Well, thank you very much. I hope it was interesting for whoever listens. And Andy, take care of yourself and keep in touch.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate your time today. It was so much fun.
Cheers. Bye.